Hi, good evening. My name is Jay Rothman. I am the host of the show. Welcome to Real Men, Real Talk Live. Welcome back to the studio. Again, my name is Jay. I'm the host of the show. I'm excited to introduce my co-host this evening. We have Evis Love Heath, the man of the land from down under. He calls Australia home. Welcome back, Evis Love.
As always, brothers and sisters, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Josh Richard coming in from Southern California. Welcome back, Josh.
Great to be here.
And of course, we have Jeff Fasano. He calls Nashville, Tennessee home today. Welcome to the show, Jeff Fasano.
Good evening, everyone.
So tonight, gentlemen, is episode number 103. We got three in a house. Anyone see a three in a house? We got three in a house right now. And tonight's episode is all about Are Your Emotions in Motion? And we're going to kind of break it down, dive in deep around what is emotional intelligence? What does it mean for us as men? And how are we showing up in our relationships and in our for ourselves as well with our emotions. And as we take a moment here, I do want to welcome our viewers and listeners. If you're joining us on live stream coming in from Facebook, YouTube, and or LinkedIn, welcome to the live streaming tonight. You can pick us up on all the podcast channels as well as replay or delay on Roku TV and Amazon Fire TV coming in through Your Health Network on both of those stations, TV channels. But in the meantime, welcome back, gentlemen. If we should, as a viewer, if you should hear something that you like or love, we encourage you to tap your love button on your monitor and light us up this evening. And if you have any questions or comments for us, please drop them down into the comment section. We'll do our best to acknowledge as many of these questions as we can. And tonight is one of those topics where it's, especially for me as a man, learning really what is emotional intelligence all about. Ev, you actually came in live today, hot off, I believe you were probably out in the wilderness in a walkabout, doing something out there, and you came in live and kind of set us up for tonight's show. So since you came in hot, why don't you set us up tonight and kick us off and kind of break down from your perspective, what is emotional intelligence all about?
Thank you, my brother. And as always, here in the land down under, brothers and sisters, thank you for having me. And look, tonight's another one of those big topics because I think, as I was talking about in the video this morning, in regards to these beautiful things that we call emotions, I think they can really color this beautiful richness of our life and this human experience, or we can really become very attached. And they could be either a blessing or a burden within our own lives. I actually experienced a bit of a road rage. I don't know what you call it on the other side of the pond, but there looked like there was a bit of a accident on the side of the road. And I saw a gentleman outside of the car going off his head. And poor lady, she's just standing back, obviously extreme rage and anger being projected at this particular lady. And I could only assume that there was obviously some confrontation in regards to who was right, who was wrong in the accident. But how I really looked at that particular event, I was only thinking to myself when I was driving past it, imagine in a world where that brother went to the side, took in a couple of big deep breaths, slowed and calmed down, came back into the situation and said to that young lady, you know how that made me feel? That didn't make me feel really good at all. It projected a little bit of feeling of anger and rage within what had happened in this particular event. And she may have said something like, oh, okay, I wasn't aware that it made you feel that particular way, but it wasn't my intention. How much of a better world that we could be living in if we had some emotional intelligence within some of these events and circumstances within our lives. Man, I put my hand up in that video this morning. I also explained about how I was a little bit arrogant back in the day. Yeah, me. I was projecting a little bit of anger out there. I had no tools on knowing how to express my anger in the world. And, that obviously hurt people. It hurt myself. It hurt those particular environments that I was in. And it does no good for anyone or anything. One thing that I did on my self-discovery and my self-improvement and personal development on my journey was learn the power of these things that we call emotions, how these things connect to some of those memories within our lives, and how this perpetual recycling of this thought, emotion, thoughts can really rob us of our life, or like I said, could be a very, very creative tool in being able to create the story that we want to see out on the reel. So when I dived in deep and really learned about the emotional intelligence of how I could now regulate certain emotions like anger, like rage within my own life, how I could now actually express them in a more creative way, I was able to live more of a purposeful life, an intentional life, not based on a reactive life. So, yeah, there's a few things in there I think we could start diving in deep with, brothers, but they're just a couple of things that I wanted to really talk about on the show tonight and dive in a little bit deeper around the science aspect around this thing that we're calling emotional intelligence, or your EQ.
Beautiful opener, Ev. Always. Love it. Plenty to talk about tonight. Plenty. What's it bringing up in you, Jay?
Well, it just brings up is really for me is, what is the true essence of emotional intelligence? For me is the ability to understand, use, and manage our own emotions in a positive way, to release stress, communicate effectively, empathize, or to say, and maybe also emphasize with others, overcome challenges, and a healthy way to diffuse conflict. That's the basic breakdown of what emotional intelligence is. Now, we all have a certain level. We're all at a different stage or a different level of emotional intelligence, depending on where we're at in our life's journey. And so there are some that are referred to as a high EQ or emotional intelligence, and there are others that are at a lower level. And so really for me, what I hope we do tonight is take some time to break down some tips, tricks, and tools on how we as men especially, because we tend to get I call it the raw end of the stick as far as showing up with very strong toxic masculinity in many of our relationships and in our own lives. And is that serving us or is that hurting us? Is that a blessing or is it a burden? And I mean, that's a rhetorical question because we know the answer. I could tell you that in my younger years, when I would lose control and I had no emotional regulation, I never stepped away from that confrontation or that debate or that moment feeling good about how I showed up. I always came back to feeling guilt, feeling shame, regretting some things that I may have said or some actions that I may have shared with that individual, whether they were someone in my life that I knew or they were even a stranger. How often do we encounter, like what you described this day with you, Ev, over in Australia, as far as road rage and how that played out?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Fasano, you are mute. It's not that often that you are dormant and quiet, but you were in that moment.
I find the term emotional intelligence interesting. I think it's more heart-based than emotional intelligence in our minds. I think it's really about having a whole bunch of tools to know how to feel our feelings. And in 102 shows, I've talked a lot about feelings over the last long time we've been doing this. in in that case that Ev was just talking about, situations happen, feelings arise, and we get charged. And those feelings have, and I've said this many times, and I sound like I'm repeating myself, but our feelings have energy attached to them. And the emotional intelligence that I look at is understanding this part of it, knowing that our feelings have at times an immense amount of energy attached to it. So if we're triggered or activated, and all of a sudden these feelings start to move and rage within us, and let's use the term anger or even sadness, it's about learning how to release the charge of the feeling. And let's use anger because Ev brought that up at the very beginning. If we're triggered and all of a sudden this wave of anger comes up inside of us, the emotional intelligence part of it is learning first how to release the charge of the energy of the feeling. And that is where people begin to project onto others because the energy comes up and it could be very strong and it could be a rage in the moment, as I've just said, road rage. And in that moment, it's about being mindful enough or intelligent enough to realize, wow, I'm really charged right now. There's a lot of energy moving through me right now. And this charge and this anger, possibly rage, is coming up inside of me. The intelligent part of that is knowing how to release that charge and also have your feelings about it. So when we allow the energy to move and we release the charge of the energy intelligently with our tools, then we can allow that energy to move, but still have our feeling of anger, not rage. Rage is the charged part. Rage is the charged part of the feeling of anger. So once we release that charge, then we can just move into the feeling of feeling angry in that moment. That might lead to sadness in that moment, and then be able to freely express that without the charge or the rage attached to that. And that is a tool that has taken me a long time to learn because I've gone through my fits of rage in my lifetime. But it's about learning that in the moment. And we're human, so we're not always going to have it in the moment. We're not always going to know it in the moment. But if we could begin to start learning that our feelings have energy attached to them, and they could be incredibly strong at times. And that's when we have to release the charge to have the feeling and allow ourselves to freely express it on the other side with others.
I love that, Jeff. And it's like, for me, when the journey began, the EQ journey, if we're going to call it that, it was like just even recognizing what I'm feeling moment to moment. It was like that, starting to build that awareness around, how am I feeling right now? How, and what in the world is sort of tempting me to react a certain way. And, in that moment of noticing, we realize that we have choice. And, the world can't really make us feel any way. I mean, someone could be screaming in your face and we have choice. It's not this inevitable that we have to react in anger back or meet the world at that level, whether it be pain or joy or, anger or sorrow, or we don't always have to meet the world at that level. We often do, but taking that moment to really notice, okay, what am I feeling in this moment and why? If you have time to explore it. If you don't have time to explore it, just realizing alone that I had the power of choice was incredible. And I could choose whether the boss yelling at me, whether I was going to respond in kind and yell back. And you know what? When I first started doing this work, I wasn't great at it and I would just react. But again, it's a muscle. It's like working out. It's that, noticing more often what we're feeling, allowing the feelings to come, just like, Jeff was saying too, is that it is an energy. It has to move. It can't stay stuck. And when when those feelings do stay stuck, that's when they start to manifest in other areas of our life and dis-ease in our body. And so we have to let it move. That's kind of the overall rule of everything in life is it's energy. It has to move. And so, yeah, notice and then realize that we have choice in that moment. And we can still, even when we have choice, decide to respond in anger. And that's okay too. But just knowing that we have choice is the start. And that's where I began.
What do you make of that, Ev?
Yeah, I love that, brother. Particularly what you're talking about, noticing that we have choice, because it is really within that space that, whatever's set off or triggered a particular emotion, before you actually, create the behavior based on that emotion, that is the key to being able to have a little bit more of a serving choice for the result of the outcome, as opposed to emotions that a lot of people are actually addicted to that are based on past events.
There you go.
And see, this is where it gets a little bit, let's say, gray, because a lot of people don't really realize that they're addicted to certain emotions that are based on past memories. And when we become addicted to those particular emotions, we need to understand, brothers and sisters, these emotions are no different to like cocaine, heroin. They're hitting the same receptors on cells as those particular drugs, as emotions do. So these are sending signals, obviously, to the software, the brain, whatever you want to call it. And then you're going to call on past particular behaviors that may not be serving this point in your life. So what Josh is saying there is that in that space, in that moment where you could pull yourself away, become the observer, take in those couple of big, deep breaths, now respond or act instead of reacting based on past.
Bingo.
Hey, but Ev, with that, if in fact we are activated or triggered in a moment, and it does bring up past wounding, past memories, we can then use it to heal those past memories and those past woundings. Like, wow, this triggered me, and all of this came up inside of me right now, and it's really coming up, and it really might never even be about what has triggered me. Then you have a chance to take a look at that and go deeper within and say, wow, why did that trigger me so deeply? And what did it really trigger deep inside, past wounding, past memories, and then begin to heal that, so we can use being triggered as a wonderful healing tool.
Beautiful.
Well, I'm gonna jump in here, gentlemen. Tracy Watson coming in from Long Beach, California. Thank you for joining us this evening. She says the 3 A's. I'm gonna add a fourth A to this, which I think is absolutely key. She says awareness, acceptance, and action. But there's a fourth A, and it's called accountability.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is when we are triggered or we are activated or we are upset and we direct it towards somebody else in that moment, we are not aware of how we are impacting them, mind, body, and soul. We are not aware of how we may, by our behavior, trigger them, going back to past experience that they had. And before we know it, we're in a mud bath. We're in a boxing ring. We're just slugging it out. And there's no winners. There's no winners, whether you make it to the end of the 15 rounds or the 12 rounds or even 3 rounds. As soon as I lose control of my emotions, I'm done. I'm done because in that moment, I'm not having any empathy for the individual that I'm attacking through either my words. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be a words. It can easily just be a look. It could be,
100%.
really? Really? I mean, it can just be a look. It could be a tone. that creates a spontaneous combustible transaction between me and somebody else. And in the end, there is no love in that behavior. As soon as we have lost control and we're not even, we're angry, we're frustrated, whatever the reason is that in that moment, we choose to go into that boxing ring, there's never going to be a winner. And ultimately, speaking from my own experiences of not having a high emotional intelligence as a younger self, in that moment, I always regretted it. And it didn't take that long. It just, sometimes it was minutes later. But the accountability is key. It's like, this is where you've heard me say this many times before, and I'll say it again. When are we going to show up and grow up as men and as women too? This is not a challenge just for men. This is a challenge for all of us. But the key is, I think one of the first steps is around self-awareness. Meaning, we get confused. We think we're angry. And so we just spew out our anger. But anger is typically not, it's a secondary emotion. We're not even aware of what is it that we're really feeling at the deeper level of self. And if we're able to just step back, hit the pause button, that P word, pause, step out in that moment, even say to that individual, whether it be a friend, a relative, your partner, even a stranger, you know what, in this moment, I'm going to put myself in timeout. It's okay to say that even as an adult, because when we lose control in that moment and we are on the attack, we're hurting the other person. And do we really want to be hurting them? So when we are willing to pause or remove ourselves from that combustible moment, take time to do a couple of self-care, let's say acts or protocols, like just do some breath work. Just breathe. And you don't have to take 30 minutes to breathe here. Even if you just take a minute, do some deep breath work. So it comes back to what you said, is that when we're in that fight, flight, or freeze, and we've lost control of our emotions in that moment, we are releasing the chemicals, the hormones like cortisol and adrenaline through our body. So when we go to a deep quick breath work session just to calm ourselves down, that takes us out of what you described as that sympathetic nervous system response, drop us into the parasympathetic. You know, sometimes if you feel the need, grab your headset, grab your earbuds, go for a walk. Remove yourself from that toxic moment so that you don't say something or do something that you're going to regret.
Yep. And we got to live with that forever. And it sucks. I've said some shitty things in times that I was reacting. And J2, you brought up a good point, you know, and we're speaking a lot about anger right now, because that's, for us guys, that's, I mean, quite often how our emotional outbursts show up. But you know, what's under anger is often fear. And so when anger is triggered in another person, it was helpful for me to look at that person and think in my mind, oh, wow, I didn't realize I scared you. And, you know, I had an instance where I was butting heads with a boss, and he loved to yell. He was a yeller. And I remember thinking that in my mind when I finally wrapped my awareness around, or when I had heard that in life, was that, you know, what fear is underneath anger. And so I remember looking at him, he's like yelling in my face and spitting. And I had that emotional intelligence moment where I was like, wow, I'm sorry I scared you. And I came at him attacking me in a much different way. And I know I've talked about this story on the show before, but it's, you know, fits right now. And then, yeah, it's really important. And in my life, I absolutely didn't have that pause, that space that Ev was talking about, and emotions just came out. And like Jay said, I said a lot of things that I can't take back. And those are the things that, you know, still suck today. But I never regretted taking a pause or taking a time out or the extra breath or a little bit of time to think about something before I responded. So that pause is huge. That's our control.
There's other reasons why we make drop into a lower emotional intelligence in a moment. We haven't even touched it. And I'm going to bring it up right now. Is you all have heard the term hangry, which is when you're hungry. And
I get that.
Okay, so knowing that when we get hungry, some of us actually get agitated. We lose our patience. We have less patience. So if we know that, then why would we set ourselves up to be in that moment one more time? From my perspective, that's about self-care. You know, so sometimes it's about we haven't eaten, or we've eaten junk food, or we've eaten dirty food. And so we're not nourishing our body. And the other part too could be if we're dehydrated. Did we have enough water in a day? What are we drinking? If we're amped up on caffeine via a soda pop, as they say in some parts of the US, or too much coffee, or even too much black tea in a day, we're coming across very aggressive, and we got a short fuse. So these are just some things, you know, these are the easy, quick hits that we can do, knowing that if I get angry when I'm hungry, then it's my responsibility as an adult. That's a choice to make sure that before I engage with other people, that I make sure that I've got some food, I've got some fuel, so that I remain collective and calm at all times.
And sleep is a huge one too, because our rationing part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, takes up a lot of energy. So the brain, the brain is always trying to be efficient with itself, and so when we are tired, the body is sending all the resources to the important organs, right? And so it's literally taking resources away from your rationing part of the brain, that energy hog. It says, you know what, we're not going to give that much to that today. And so we're reacting from our survival, that emotional part. So that's why when we are tired at the end of the day and we do get in an argument, we're much more emotional. It's because we actually don't have the capacity to rationalize that conversation and go, wow, should I really be, you know, responding in this way, reacting in this way? Our power to do that and control that is way less with sleep. So sleep for me, honestly, self-care wise, is the number one that I focus on, because it keeps me sharp. It keeps me in control. So sleep is a huge one.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I want to bring something up. Bob Phillips, coming in from Sedona, Arizona, a beautiful neighbor. He says, I believe that emotional triggering is not all a negative game. What about uplifting emotional triggering?
Totally.
Anybody want to kind of break that down and dissect what you think he means by that? Uplifting emotional triggering. What would an uplifting emotional trigger be?
Watching Seinfeld. And laughing.
Tell me more, Jeff. What does that mean to you?
I mean, uplifting emotional triggering is when, you know, there's wonderful things going on in our life, our resonance raises, and we're feeling those feelings. That's a great thing to bring up, Bob, because once again, it's about looking at all of our feelings, whether they're uplifting, we're in joy, and how many people out there, when we get to that place of joy, say through their conditioning, it's like, wow, am I allowed to even feel joyful?
Yeah.
You know, something happens in our life, it raises our resonance. We start to feel joyful. How many of us cut that off? But what he's talking about really, and he's including all feelings. And once again, I'm going to bring it up here. we might start to label anger, sadness, all these feelings we don't want as negative feelings. And then all of a sudden, Bob brings us uplifting, emotional triggering, which all these wonderful, joyful feelings. And I'm raising my resonance. And those are positive feelings. Well, no. And I've said this thousands of times on this show. Feelings are feelings. And we can have them all equally by raising our awareness and consciousness of what we're feeling. Is, Josh just said earlier, being aware of our feelings. What are all of our feelings? Allowing all of our feelings, because there's no positive and no negative feelings. I think Bob said it perfectly. Uplifting feelings.
I think the key, Jeff, is having the awareness around what is the true, authentic emotion or feeling that I have in a moment. I could tell you that I was not, let's say, aware of my emotions. I only was aware of a few of them, and they were not the loving kind. They were toxic. And when I wasn't expressing them through frustration, I was stuffing them. And neither one of them was good for me. Neither one was good for my relationships. The most important one being with myself. And so it really does come down to so many of us that grew up in homes that either were taught to stuff them or taught to express them in a very hurtful, harmful, toxic way. It doesn't serve us as adults today. It doesn't serve our relationships. I work with a lot of couples that pass through Sedona that book me for Hike and Heal couples relationships. That's out of 5. That's my number 1 tour today that I do. When I say number 1, it's like 4 out of 5 of my bookings are couples coming through, because there's so much pain in relationships today. Because people, I'm going to just generalize, but we don't know how to show up. We don't know how to express the true essence of what we're feeling. And we tend to go right to, the easy one, which is anger or frustration. But really, if we were to really dive in and in a moment and ask yourself or ask myself, is that really what I'm feeling? Or am I feeling sad? I never said that. In 54 years of my life, it was very rare that I would say those words, because I wasn't even aware when I was feeling sad. But today I'm free. Today I can say that. When I feel sad, I could feel sad because of something that I receive in a text or an email or a voicemail. I could feel sad because I watch a movie that makes me feel sad. And just having the ability, the desire to understand what I'm feeling, what emotion is coming forward in that moment, helps me then stay calm, helps me then stay in a position where I'm not going to regret something I said. It's going to help me be more empathetic towards the individual that in the past I may have inadvertently or indirectly attacked them, or they received it as an attack. And so it really comes down to, what are we feeling? How many of us men, honestly, when was the last time any one of you guys said, I feel joyful right now? Or I feel bliss right now, or I feel sad. Those are words that very rarely you'll hear come out of a man's mouth.
Every day of my life. Every single day of my life. The first thing I do when I get up in the morning, what am I feeling? And I call out my feelings. I'm feeling sad all day long. Feeling all day long. Wow, I'm feeling, just connecting in. Most people describe situations. Most people like, so how does that make you feel? Well, it makes me feel like I want to get up and tell that person something. Well, that's not a feeling. In the moment, in every single moment, our feelings roll through us. And every single day, we just, how am I feeling right now? I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling joyful. We can have all of our feelings in 1 minute. They just roll through us, and you can say, I'm feeling sad. Today for me was a very down, sad day for whatever reason. I don't know. I'm just feeling that today. I'm feeling, lethargic. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling, down. And a lot of that's been happening today. But so you just be with it, allow yourself to feel through it as a pot. So in our production meeting, we were talking about what many folks do. I've done it in my past, is can you allow yourself to feel your feelings? So for example, I'm feeling sad right now. In that moment, can you move into your heart, drop into your heart, and allow yourself to feel sad? Or do you pop into your head and want to know why you feel sad so you can try to control the feeling? Like if I know why that I'm feeling angry, if I know why in this moment that I'm feeling sad, is that going to allow you to not feel the feeling? Moving into your mind of why am I feeling sad? Why am I feeling it? Why am I even feeling joyful? As opposed to letting yourself feel joyful in the moment, as opposed to trying to figure everything out. So you can do this every single day, and I do. I allow myself to feel each and every day, and I go into it and I call it out, and then I follow the succession of it, just giving myself the freedom, because, and I've said this in the show many, many times before, Mom used to squelch that. It's really interesting how we talk about many men learned from their father, and their fathers were stoic and wouldn't feel. Well, for me, it was the opposite. What I learned from my mother by saying, if feelings started to come up in me that she did not like, she goes, stop crying, stop doing that, because it was affecting her and triggering her inside of us because she didn't know how to feel. And that's the most important part, is allow yourselves the freedom to feel your feelings every single day and move in without trying to figure out why. The why will eventually come.
It's beautiful.
It's such a keen intrapersonal awareness around this whole emotional intelligence. Now, what you're talking about there too, Jeff, is understanding the difference between having the emotion and actually acting on it. Because so many people, we're not even identifying some of these emotions that come up in our life. And for my clients, that's the first thing that I get them onto. And I've said this on previous shows. I get them onto my 3x3 method, or 4x4, where every 3 hours from waking, I get them to journal down what they're feeling in that moment, what emotions are coming up, what mood are you in, what thoughts are happening. So you start creating this awareness and, as they call it, emotional literacy around some of these emotions and what may be triggering in these external events. So it is key for me. And, obviously going back into that mindfulness side, the meditation, sitting with some of these emotions. Not trying to judge them, not trying to even act on them. Just sit with them and feel them.
Right.
That's just it. Half the time we're trying to change it.
Yeah. The bingo. Exactly, Josh.
Seriously.
Exactly.
Like half of my life before was spent trying to change how I felt in the moment.
Really?
And it was like, so you're either chasing happiness or trying to push down sadness, or it was never, ever just okay to be what I was right then. And that's exactly what the two of you are saying right now, is like, just be. I mean, fuck. If you're sad, just be sad for a minute and feel it. Let it wash over you and then let it move on.
That's Josh, you nailed it right there.
There's a fifth A there too, Josh. That'll be the fifth A, appreciation.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
I could tell you guys, for me, when I started to be able to communicate, well, first understand and have the awareness of what I was feeling, and then be able to communicate it in a way that wasn't harmful or hurtful to myself and others, there's freedom in that. It's like, it takes practice, especially when that's not how you showed up for most of your life. even, we don't talk a whole lot about business and leadership in our life, in our roles. Josh, you are in a leadership role in Hollywood. Jeff, you're in a leadership role. Ev, you're in a leadership role. How many leaders have we encountered in our own careers
I know
that
where you're
were,
going
what
with
I'll
this.
say, low, if we're high in the emotional intelligence, that are low in the emotional intelligence? Now, we could talk about leaders in companies. We could talk about leaders in religious faith buildings. We could talk about leaders in politics, in government. How many of our so-called leaders are lacking emotional intelligence, meaning they're in a lower end of that, as opposed to the higher end?
Jay,
Now,
I think I actually read an article about that in Inc. magazine where they studied all these people that were in high level positions, and they actually had lower EQ than most of their staff. So it's this weird thing in that role. Yeah.
But does it have to be? Even I will tell you that when I was in leadership role in my old corporate career, I did not lose control. Now, I lost control internally. That eventually led to medical conditions and diseases. But only at home did I lose control. But in the office with a couple of hundred people that I was engaged in daily, I did not lose control. I don't know how that was possible. I was just bottling. I think I pulled a Jeff Fasano's mom. I just bottled it up, and then I just kind of, as soon as I got activated or triggered at home, I do it there. But it's there's an opportunity, I think, for both men and women to really understand, how are we showing up, and are we okay with how we're showing up? Look at our relationships. You don't have to do a quick quiz. You could do a really short quiz. How have I been in my relationships in the last 5 years?
Mm-hmm.
How healthy are my relationships? How am I showing up in my relationships? And instead of blaming other people for pissing you off, if you're in relationships with one after the other, love is pain. Now, whether it be an intimate relationship or even a friendship that's supposed to be loving, and love turns into pain. You're always in drama. You're always in fights. You're always dishonoring and disrespecting each other. Then there's an opportunity to look in a mirror and ask yourself, why are all my relationships turning out this way? What's the common denominator?
Mm-hmm.
It's me. It's me. And then what am I willing to do about that?
Mm-hmm.
Am I going to bury my head in the sand? Am I going to, as you talked about in the live this morning, Ev, am I just going to jump into the victim mentality? Am I going to just sit on a pity party and say it's their fault? I just got a bad picker in my life? Or are we going to take accountability for our life?
You know, when we start to learn how to feel our feelings and allow our feelings and be with it, and then raise our awareness and consciousness to that, and then we can raise that quote unquote emotional intelligence, and then move to a place of greater responsibility.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
But it's about what we've been really talking about in 4 different ways, I think, is raising our awareness and consciousness to our emotions and our feelings, and then allowing them to be there. And once we allow ourselves to be there and even recognize the charge in it, then we could move to a point of a greater awareness and consciousness and accountability for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really raising that awareness and learning how to feel.
Yep, love that. I want to take a moment here, gentlemen, just to take a breather here and just acknowledge some of our viewers that are popping up tonight. We haven't seen them in some time. I just am excited anytime we see people that have kind of gone off and they come back. Jolene, welcome back. Barbara Douglas, it's been a while. I have missed you. I've missed you, my friend. Welcome back. And anyone else that I've missed in the comment feed, I want to acknowledge Isabella says, I'm having a lot of aha moments. Wow, I'm becoming more aware.
Beautiful.
I love that.
Beautiful.
Thank you
love
so much
what
for joining us. Go ahead.
I love what Elaine Leonard says too. I love being able to feel and do nothing and just be with myself as is emotional mastery.
Yes. And that's a really uncomfortable place to be for some people. It was for me. Like the thought of sitting with my emotions sounded like the last thing on the planet I wanted to do. Seriously. When I was at my worst and in my like angry, bitter phase, if you told me to sit in silence with my feelings, that was like a death sentence.
Yeah.
There's no way I would have. Yeah. But we realized that it's okay. And I think that's the thing too, is that, at least I'll speak for myself as a guy. I'm a doer, right? It's like I was taught to do, and we solve everything by doing, and so this concept of being with my emotions, being with my feelings, that was hard, uncomfortable, and weird. And I totally get it. And we realized that we can be with these things, and that it's okay, and that even the discomfort of it is okay too. We don't have to do anything with that either. And that and instead of just trying to always change our state, just be with it and feel it and be okay. And it's uncomfortable, but you realize that you're safe. And I think that's what the brain's always trying to do too, is keep us safe, right? Avoid pain, avoid all of these things. And it's like, we have to teach ourselves that we're safe even when we feel those, that it's okay.
That's great, Josh. Yeah, it is about safety. I'll repeat a story I told last week. A couple of weeks ago, I got triggered pretty deep, and this rage came out. And as it came out, and I used my tools to move the energy and move through it, I felt very unsafe in that, because it was, as we were talking about earlier, it wasn't what was triggered was not in the here and now. What was triggered was past memories and past wounding. And it was so deep inside of me that when the energy moved to this rage, and I talked about this last week, afterwards I felt very unsafe, and it frightened me because I didn't know where it came from, but I allowed it. I allowed the rage and the anger to pour out of me, using my tools to move the energy. And then when the energy moved and I began to breathe and calm down, I started to feel very unsafe and very frightened, because I didn't know where all of that came from until I started to process it and realized what it was all about. And it took a while to process and then begin to heal that. But Josh, you're right on. It's when feelings come up, and we're talking about feelings of anger and sadness and feelings that we don't like, we want to try to control it and then feel safe when we're in it, which is why we try to figure it out right away instead of allowing ourselves to feel it. And let's, as Bob Phillips said earlier, let's look at in those moments where there's joy and we start to laugh and we feel that. Are we trying to control that? I don't think so. Maybe some people are, but we never trying to control the joyous feelings that come through, the laughter that moves the energy of joy, how we express joy. So we all allow that. So why can't we allow all the stuff that we don't like as well?
Yeah. I want to switch gears here real quick, gentlemen, as we're approaching 10 minutes, coming up 11 minutes to the hour. In our production meeting, we touched on the prefrontal cortex. And so, Josh, I don't know if you want to take a stab at it, being that you're the brain expert. What role does the prefrontal cortex play? And if you don't want to jump on that tonight, that's okay. We'll
Hit
give it
us.
to Ev.
Yeah, I'm gonna pass it to Ev. Ev had a beautiful explanation of it in the
Okay.
the pre-show.
You're right, brother. I'll quickly get you back. So that prefrontal cortex is just our ability to be able to make rational, logical decisions based on those previous events. Whereas we sit in behind that prefrontal cortex, and that is our response of emotions. That's called our limbic brain.
Mm-hmm.
So you can think, a lot of these things that are within that sort of system within the brain, things like your amygdala, things like your hippocampus. You want to dive in deep and really learn about your emotions, brothers and sisters, and how they link up to some of these memories. Go and dive in deep around those particular organs within the brain.
Mm-hmm.
It really does allow you to come from a lower part of yourself to a higher space in the cerebrum, the ram's head. So that's just a quick on the prefrontal cortex. You can be your Neo, or you can be the Zero.
All our memories are stored in the limbic brain.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about accessing all of that back there.
And that's the emotional. That's the oldest part of the brain, is the
Right.
emotional part,
Yes.
and that's survival part, and that's why we revert back to that, and that sort of runs the show. It's like when we stop filtering and just react, it's coming from that emotional survival place, and we are not in control.
We're talking about what we're touching on tonight is pretty important, and learning and growing into this. This is not something that you could just learn in 15, 20 minutes or an hour, or going to some workshop and then walk out of a 3-hour workshop and learn all of this. This is a process of growing into having this greater awareness and consciousness, or emotional intelligence. And it's about practicing it, but it's also allowing yourself to make those mistakes. If I project, if I scream at somebody, utilizing that and saying, oh, wow, okay, where did that come from? Because we have to keep in mind here, and I said this in the production meeting, we're human, folks, and we are going to project, and that is going to happen. The key is that's how we can grow and learn from that.
Well, speaking of learning, I want to throw this out here. How many of us are aware? Well, let me back up. What role do our teachers, primarily our caretakers that raised us, what role do they play in our emotional intelligence? Meaning, is it a learned behavior? What do you think, Josh?
I remember reading an article about that IQ is something you're sort of born with, and you can't really change your IQ, but your EQ can absolutely 1,000%. That's what this whole article was about, was that it's a learned skill, and it is just that, a skill. And that means that if you practice, you get better. And so absolutely.
So how many of us, Josh, let me ask you this, Josh. How many of us grew up and said, no way in hell do I want to become my mom or my dad. I don't want to show up as an adult like my parents. And this is when we're about 18, maybe 21, 22, 23. And then fast forward, we're now 35, 38, 42, 44 years old. And guess what? We turned into one of our parents that not necessarily was what I say a role model of health and wellness, of love and kindness, but coming from anger, coming from victim mentality, coming from martyrdom, being the martyr, being the matriarch of the family. And then we find ourselves behaving exactly the way we said we didn't want to. How does that happen? Why does that happen?
It's what we learned. We grew up learning from parents, and they taught us everything that we know before we left the house. So that was our example. And, I think for a lot of us, growing up and with our friend groups and stuff like that, there weren't resources like Real Men, Real Talk Live on the air to talk about these things. I mean, if we roll back the clock into our parents' time, there was very little, if any, of this. So, we can't blame them too. They didn't know what they didn't know, but we have all these resources now. We have all these beautiful tools now, so we can break the cycles of learning, and we can be the models now for next generations in all of our relationships, friends, coworkers, bosses. The waves, when we start, we've talked about this in the past, when we start doing the work, those waves ripple out. And how we show up in the world, when we show up from our heart space that Jeff talked about instead of our mind, and when we show up, as our radiant beings standing in our truth, expressing our feelings, expressing our boundaries, expressing our power, those ripple out into our friend groups, into our communities, into our workplaces, if we allow it, and it starts to create change.
Boom, boom. Love it, brother.
The change starts with us. We can break the cycle. 1,000%.
So Ev, let me ask you then, based on what Josh just shared, and I'm going to invite you to close this out here tonight. How do we break the cycle, break the chain to the emotional intelligence, which was in fact a learned behavior from whoever influenced us in our youngest years, so that we can show up in a much more loving, kind way for ourselves first, and then for others? Because it's not about, we can't show up for others with love and kindness and having a high level of emotional intelligence where we're not hurting other people emotionally, physically, mentally, sexually, and spiritually until we first do the healing for ourselves. But how do we break the chain to those patterns that it's almost like it's tattooed at the cellular level?
Well, I think we've given all the tools, a lot of them tonight, brothers and sisters. But we've just got to become aware whether those emotions were ours or not. You really illustrated it perfectly, that anger as a young fella that I was demonstrating, that I knew wasn't me. They were learnt emotions. My body had picked up those particular emotions based on the environment I was in when I was growing up as a child. Now, when I started to see the mirror reflection within the relationships that I was in, and I started projecting some of these angers in a particular way that wasn't serving anyone, I had to do the inventory, brothers and sisters. I had to do the audit of my own life and ask myself the very question: is it who I choose to be today? Or are you going to keep playing out past behaviors that were passed down to you that no longer are yours today? Play to those strengths, brothers and sisters.
Let me ask you this, though, Ev. How can we, as men and women, help our brothers and sisters awaken to the fact that how they're showing up is harmful, how they're showing up is hurtful, how they're showing up is toxic for themselves and their relationships? What role can we play? Are we playing it? Are we doing enough?
The role of support. The role of support, creating the safe space where some of these brothers and sisters can actually start expressing some of these things that they've felt shameful around: anger, guilt, all of these other low vibratory emotions. And then you create that safe space, and then we start freely expressing that. That creates the freedom.
Yep.
There you go.
Allowing, creating that safe space where someone who is just learning how to get in touch with their feelings to allow them to do that. Because I'm sure all four of us have had people in our lives, even with the four of us, that have created that space, safe space for us to do that. And that's the beginning of knowing that it is safe to feel.
There you go.
Beautiful.
You nailed it.
Boom.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I want to take a moment here to thank our viewers one more time that joined us this evening on our live. Many of you are back. We're always excited to see you join us again. Jeremy Melton coming in from Pennsylvania. Welcome back to Real Men Real Talk Live. Of course, those that I didn't mention, you know who you are. We love you. We love all of you. Tonight was an absolutely critical, really key topic around how we show up. And I just want to end by saying it's simple, not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy, because until you are willing to look in the mirror and really be truthful and honest with yourself and say, do I like me? Do I like how I'm showing up? How are my relationships? Are my relationships love is love, or my relationships love is pain? And if it's the latter, then you can change. You could be the change maker in your life.
Mm-hmm.
How that happens is you have to be willing to show up and grow up. And with that, we'll see you guys next week on episode 104 coming in. Anybody have any closing thoughts before we head out?
Happy birthday, Mum, from here in the land down under from your son. Happy birthday.
Hey.
Mum's birthday today, brother.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
man.
Happy birthday, Mom, over in Australia. And last week I neglected to mention on air, it was also my mom's birthday
Yes,
last Thursday
brother.
evening.
Yes.
So happy birthday, belated birthday to my mom again. I did speak with her, and we did speak, but it's also different to hear it live on a broadcast coming in across the globe. So happy birthday to all of our moms. And we do have a Mother's Day coming up, I believe, in the United States, perhaps this weekend. So happy Mother's Day to all moms that are with us, all moms that have transitioned out. We love you. And thank you for birthing all of us. And with that, we'll catch you all next week on Real Men Real Talk Live. Peace and blessings. It's a wrap.